In August 1806, the Prussian king, Friedrich Wilhelm III, decided to go to war with France. Now, Napoleon responded to this threat by launching a strike aimed at the heart of Prussia, and thus began his Prussian campaign of 1806. By early October, the French were marching north towards Prussia, and the Prussian army found themselves slightly outmaneuvered near Jena. In this position, the Prussian commander, the Duke of Brunswick, decided to try and maneuver his forces north towards Prussia, leaving a small part of their force behind near Jena, which would fight the main French force under Napoleon. The bulk of those Prussians headed north through Auerstadt, camped overnight, and in the morning of the 14th of October 1806 confronted a single French corps under Louis-Nicolas Devoe. Devoe's corps, the Third Corps, formed part of the French right wing. Bernadotte's First Corps was also part of that, but he'd been ordered by Napoleon to take the road south towards Jena. And so Devoe would find himself facing the bulk of that French army with his corps by himself. So the Bataille de Auerstät recreates such a situation faced by Devoe as he encounters the bulk of that Prussian army northeast of Auerstadt, around the town of Hassenhausen. Devoe's corps numbers roughly around 25,000 and numbers 3 divisions under Morand, Friant and Gudin respectively. He has a relatively small light cavalry force under Villaine and a number of artillery pieces as well. The Prussian force is much larger. Under the Duke of Brunswick, they have the advanced guard with Blücher's relatively strong cavalry brigade, the 2nd Division under Wartensleben, the 1st Division under the Prince of Orange, the 3rd Division under Schmettau, which arrives first early in the morning. Then there's a reserve corps under Kalkreuth, which consists of the 1st Reserve Division under Kunheim and the 2nd Reserve Division under Arnhem, and they both arrive later in the day. Now, in the first few hours of the morning, there's a heavy fog which limits visibility. This limits the ability of cavalry to charge, artillery to fire. At the start of this scenario, the adjutant of the 3rd Corps, Colonel Jean-Raymond Charles Burke, is on the ball with some light cavalry and the 25th Regiment of French Light Infantry. Opposing them on the road west, or to the right of this image, on the road to Auerstadt, are some of the advanced forces of Schmettau's 3rd Division and Wartensleben's 2nd Division, some infantry regiments. More importantly, you have Blücher with some cavalry in the area which can threaten those advanced French forces. So the first hour of the battle is pretty much a race for Hassenhausen. The French primarily bring on the reinforcements of the 3rd Division, and they try and get as close to Hassenhausen as possible. They're slightly delayed by Blücher's cavalry, which really threatens them and slows them down, and they start to file out before Hassenhausen, around that sunken road just to the south of Hassenhausen. Meanwhile, far in the west, the Prussians also rush to bring their reinforcements on and advance them as close to Hassenhausen as possible. This first hour, though, is really dominated by some really passive play. Blücher is a little hesitant to get his cavalry involved this early. He threatens the French light cavalry, but there's very little fighting. So as soon as the French can get into Hassenhausen, they begin to fall out. They form a line behind the wall to the west of Hassenhausen, and with Blücher's cavalry facing them in the southwest, they form a fairly strong defensive wall along that south side of Hassenhausen. They pretty much formed general order throughout the north side of Hassenhausen and focused their defences around that town. In the meanwhile, in the west, the Prussian reinforcements from mainly Schmettau's division begin to arrive and form up just to the west, northwest of Hassenhausen. Now, the Prussians also play very passively. They form up northwest of Hassenhausen, but they don't quite advance. They wait for quite a few of their divisions to get into place before they actually advance. The French put out some of their infantry companies to the northwest of Hassenhausen. They don't set up skirmishes, which is a mistake. They just send out some companies to slow down and deter a Prussian assault on the town. Towards 10 o'clock, the Prussians advance towards the west-northwest of Hassenhausen. And they exchange fire with some of those light companies. The Prussians doing the bulk of the damage on the French. The French suffer some heavy casualties among those companies that they sent out from Hassenhausen. In the meantime, the 2nd French Division under Friant has arrived, and they begin to take up a position northeast of Hassenhausen, forming a defensive line in case the Prussians try and move around that right side of the French flank. So around 10:30, the French have formed this line that really hinges on Hassenhausen. They've occupied the town, formed up behind the walls, extended the line southwest of those walls in front of the sunken road, and it hooks around to the right, defending the right side of that town. Throughout this period, the cavalry is very inactive. The main Prussian concern is really wasting their cavalry on quite strong French infantry. The French light cavalry are outnumbered by the Prussian cavalry, including some heavy cavalry, and they fear that they'll be wrecked in a counterattack. At about 10 a.m, the Prussians begin to move their cavalry north around behind the infantry. The main reason for this is there's more open space on that left flank of the Prussian line, and there's more opportunity for manoeuvre and, I guess, for the use of the cavalry. And the French pretty quickly respond by moving their light cavalry behind the French line to oppose that Prussian move. Now, by this stage, the Prussian 2nd Division under Wartensleben has taken up position to the left of Schmettau, north of Hassenhausen, just basically extending that line very directly, running from the, I guess, west of Hassenhausen to the northeast, opposing that French line. And the 1st Division under the Prince of Orange is not far behind. They're just to the west of Hassenhausen, north of Tangwitz, and they're going to form up shortly south of Schmettau's division. Now, one of the main problems here between 11 and 12 is the Prussians realise they've set up their artillery too close to the French line, right on that road leading to Hassenhausen. This really limits manoeuvre in this area, and it continues to be a problem over the coming hours. The artillery is too close, it's too close to the road, and it makes the distribution of those forces west of Hassenhausen quite difficult. Nonetheless, between 11 and 12, the Prussians do move on their left flank to try and attack the French line. The French also counter by extending their line further north. The Prussians try to assault the French on the right side of the French line, the far left, up in the north there, but the assault goes pretty poorly. The first wave of attackers are all pretty much disordered. A second wave is then sent in, and some of those are routed as well as being generally disordered. So that first attack by the 2nd Division under Wartensleben went pretty poorly for the Prussians up in the north. Schmettau it continues to hold in the centre. They're suffering some heavy casualties from French artillery, but they're not quite assaulting the town yet. They're letting that division in the north do all the work. In the meantime, the French 3rd Division under Gudin has also arrived, and they decide to move down onto the left flank of the French army, the left side in the south there. Their plan, there was a tough decision here whether to move north or on the south side of the French line. They decided that they can probably do more work on the kind of exposed south line of that Prussian line, and so they begin to move southwest of Hassenhausen. Now, once Gudin's division gets into position, they almost immediately launch an assault on the right southern flank of that Prussian line. This goes terribly. Two of the battalions rout immediately. Most of the other battalions disorder, whilst the Prussians hold remarkably well. Only one of those Prussian defenders disorder. As a result, the French almost immediately have to pull back on their left flank. They send out some skirmishers to slow down any Prussian counterattack, but they really have to fall back to form a stronger line southwest of Hassenhausen. So by midday, all of Davout's corps is on the field. The Prussians are now starting to bring up their reserve corps. Kunkheim's division, 1st Division, Reserve Division, and Arnhem's 2nd Reserve Division. They're just west of Hassenhausen. So this time that the Prussians, they don't launch assaults, but they move into exchange fire combat with the French on the left and right flanks of the French army. Both these sides of the French army have been heavy hit. They're suffering heavy casualties, and so the Prussians decide that they'll just try to batter away with rifle fire rather than assaulting. Instead, that reserve division slowly begins to take up a position in the centre of the Prussian line. At about 12:30, after pretty much sitting in the centre of the Prussian line for a long time, Schmettau's division is sent in to attack just north, right on the hinge of that French position north of Hassenhausen. And it's a pretty good attack. The Queen's Dragoons charge into the French lines, and they pierce a nice little hole, which causes some problems for the French. Schmettau's infantry follows up, and the French decide to pull their line back away from the north, from those 2nd and 3rd Prussian divisions in the north. So the line runs in a sort of east-west line along that northern edge of Hassenhausen. In the south, the French are holding the line. They've got some artillery pieces set up just south of Hassenhausen, quite strong defensive positions, but you can see in the Prussian line that reserve corps has arrived and they're about to do some damage to the French. Arnhem's reserve division, 2nd Reserve Division, is set up. The guards are right behind them, and the French are very weak in the centre of their line. So at around 1 p.m, things aren't looking good for the French. Davout probably should have used his early numbers to his advantage and tried to outmaneuver the Prussians. He could have used a corps activation to activate all 3 divisions and basically outmaneuvered the Prussian moving around their flanks, whilst the Prussians could only really activate 1 or 2 manoeuvre units at a time. It would have limited their ability to respond to those French moves. Because the French were a bit too passive, they gave the Prussians the initiative, allowed them to move up, and the Prussians ended up attacking the French quite successfully. Generally, it's been a very passive morning to the battle. There have been a few minor cavalry skirmishes out in the right flank, nothing too significant. And I'd have to say that the Prussians hold the initiative at the moment.